The ceremonial klaxon was still ringing through the bridge when Commander Valen's voice cut across the channel, flat and final. "Strike her name from the passenger manifest. No captain in this fleet will carry a crippled princess to her own coronation." Corporal Asher Marin heard it because he was standing in the wrong corridor at the wrong time, a tool kit slung over one shoulder and a cracked bulkhead panel under his arm. He was human, the only one aboard the Thessara, the Caliph Dominion's grandest diplomatic cruiser, and his rank was exactly what it sounded like, the lowest rung a foreign-born serviceman could occupy. He fixed doors. He sealed leaks. He replaced corroded wiring in sections of the ship the officers preferred to forget existed. Nobody briefed him on royal passengers or coronation itineraries. He heard what the walls carried, and the walls carried everything. The voice belonged to Commander Valen, first officer of the Thessara and acting head of the succession convoy. The name being struck belonged to Princess Selyara of House Caliph Thirdborn, surviving daughter of the late Empress Tovana, and by every law of the Dominion, next in line for the ivory seat. She was also, as Asher had gathered from 6 months of quiet listening, partially paralyzed from the hips down, a childhood fall from a ceremonial spire. The Caliph did not speak of it directly. They spoke around it, the impediment, the complication, the matter of her mobility, as though a woman who could not walk had simply misplaced something and would find it if she tried hard enough. Asher set the panel against the wall, straightened, and looked at the junction corridor that led toward the royal suite. 2 sentries stood at parade rest, their ceremonial pikes reflecting the cold overhead light. They had not moved. They had heard the same broadcast he had. Their faces said nothing. He walked past them. The sentries did not stop him. He was maintenance. Maintenance went everywhere. That was the quiet bargain of being beneath notice. You could go where the notice could not. The royal suite's outer door was open. The inner door was sealed. He could hear voices through it, muffled but sharp. One of them was female, controlled, each word bitten off at its edge. The other was older, male, conciliatory in the way that powerful men became conciliatory when they had already decided the outcome and wanted the protest to exhaust itself. He knocked. The voices stopped. The inner door slid open. A Caliph attendant, tall, angular, silver hair pulled into a severe knot, stared down at him with undisguised bewilderment. Behind her, the suite opened into a wide observation chamber, floor-to-ceiling viewport, the blue-white streak of hyperspace beyond, and in the center of the room, seated in a hoverchair whose elegant lines could not quite disguise its function, was Princess Selyara. She was not what he had expected. He had expected fragile. The Caliph talked about her as though she were made of paper and apology. Instead, the woman in the hoverchair had the bearing of someone who had been fighting the same argument for so long that the fight itself had become posture. Her skin was a pale lavender gray, smooth and faintly luminous in the observation light. Her eyes were large, dark amber, almost bronze, and they were dry. That was the first thing Asher noticed. Everyone around her had decided she should be grieving. She had decided otherwise. Her hair was dark teal, cut shorter than he had seen on any Caliph woman of rank just past her jaw, a practicality that probably scandalized the court. Her pointed ears were prominent, unadorned. No jewels, no crown. She wore a simple high-collared gray tunic, military cut, the kind of garment that said, "I dress to work, not to be looked at." She looked at him the way you look at a wrong door opening during the worst moment of your day, with a flash of irritation that almost immediately became curiosity, because the wrong door was the only one that had opened at all. "You are the human," she said, "not a question." "Corporal Marin, Your Highness, Maintenance Division." "I know what maintenance means." Her voice had a dry edge that Asher recognized the defense mechanism of someone who had been explained to for so long that she had learned to cut explanations off at the knees. "Did Commander Valen send you to check the plumbing, or has my suite also been struck from the ship's maintenance schedule?" "No one sent me, Your Highness." That stopped her. The attendant behind him inhaled sharply. Princess Selyara's amber eyes narrowed, then widened by a fraction, and in that fraction was something she had not expected to feel today: surprise. "Then why are you here?" Asher looked at the viewport, then back at her. "Because the broadcast went to every speaker on this deck, and you're the only person on this ship who doesn't have someone standing in her doorway telling her what happens next." Silence. The older male voice, which Asher now saw belonged to Chancellor Dreven, a heavy-set caliph with the jowls and exhausted eyes of a man who had been managing unmanageable things for decades, cleared his throat. "Corporal, this is a matter of state. I appreciate the sentiment, but—" "She's the next empress," Asher said. He did not raise his voice. He did not look at Dreven. He looked at Selyara. "Unless succession law changed in the last 10 minutes. Dreven's mouth opened, closed. Selyara's hoverchair hummed as she shifted forward. "It did not," she said quietly. "Chancellor, leave us." Dreven sputtered. The attendant's hand went to her mouth. But there was something in Selyara's voice, a tone Asher suspected she had not used in a very long time, the tone of a woman who outranked everyone in the room and had just remembered it. Dreven left. The attendant hesitated, then followed. The door sealed. Selyara and Asher looked at each other across the observation suite, hyperspace streaming behind her in silence. "Sit down, Corporal," she said. There was only one other chair in the room, a formal reception seat meant for visiting dignitaries. Asher sat in it without ceremony. It was too tall for him. His boots dangled a centimeter off the floor. Something almost happened to Selyara's mouth, not quite a smile, but the ghost of one, quickly suppressed. "Commander Valen has refused to carry me to Caliph Prime," she said. "He considers my presence aboard a succession vessel to be," his words, "an insult to the dignity of the ivory seat. The other 3 captains in the convoy have agreed. They will petition the Admiralty to invoke the fitness clause and pass succession to my cousin, the rival. Your cousin, who has been lobbying for the seat since before your mother died." Her eyes sharpened. "You know about the rival?" "I fix things on this ship for 14 hours a day, Your Highness. I hear everything that travels through the walls. Your cousin has been in contact with Commander Valen since before we left port. The fitness clause petition was drafted before the Thessara's engines were warm." Another silence. This one was different, heavier. Selyara's hands gripped the armrests of her hoverchair, and for the first time, Asher saw the cost behind her composure. Her knuckles were pale. Her jaw was set. She was not fragile, but she was exhausted, and the exhaustion was the kind that came from fighting the same wall so many times that the wall had started to feel like the entire world. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because you should know the shape of the fight before you decide whether to keep fighting it." "And if I decide not to?" Asher met her gaze. His expression did not change. Steady. A face that had been weathered by years of being the only human in rooms that did not want him there, and had learned that the only response to being unwanted was to be useful. "Then I'll fix the door behind you when you leave," he said. "But I don't think that's what you're going to decide." Selyara stared at him for a long moment. Then she leaned back in her hoverchair and said, very quietly, "No, it is not." She told him what she needed, and Asher listened. The Thessara was 46 hours from Caliph Prime. The coronation window was 72 hours after that. The convocation of houses would invoke emergency succession and seat the rival by default. Valen's plan was simple: delay. He did not need to physically remove Selyara from the ship. He only needed to slow the Thessara's arrival past the window, a navigational recalculation, an engine diagnostic that required the convoy to hold position, a communications relay failure that prevented Selyara from contacting the convocation directly. "He is already slowing us," Selyara said. "I felt the engines shift 2 hours ago. We have dropped below standard transit speed. If we continue at this rate, we will arrive 14 hours after the window closes. Asher nodded slowly. Engine room is on deck 9. I have access. You are a maintenance corporal. I have access to every deck on this ship, Your Highness. That is the advantage of being the man they send to fix the things that break at 3 in the morning. The plan took shape in the observation suite. Two people who should never have been in the same room building something out of the only materials they had. Her knowledge of the law and his knowledge of the ship. Salyara could invoke the right of conveyance, an ancient Caliph statute that required any Dominion vessel to transport a claimant to their coronation at maximum sustainable speed, on pain of the captain's commission. The statute had not been invoked in 300 years. Valen was betting she did not know it existed. He was wrong. She had been studying Caliph succession law since she was 14 years old, since the day her sisters died in the frontier collapse, and she became the heir nobody wanted. But invoking the right required transmitting the claim to the convocation directly, and Valen had already locked the primary communications array. There is a secondary relay on deck 12, Asher said. Emergency broadcast system. It is hardwired to the hull antenna separate circuit from the main array. Valen cannot lock it because it is classified as a safety system. I installed the backup coupling myself 6 weeks ago. Can you reach it? I can reach anything on this ship, Your Highness. The question is whether I can reach it before Valen notices, and what happens to my career when he does. Salyara looked at him. The amber of her eyes caught the blue-white light of hyperspace, and for a moment she looked less like a princess and more like a woman who had been carrying something impossibly heavy for a very long time and had just felt, for the first time, the possibility that someone might help her hold it. Your career, she said, you would risk your commission. For this, I do not have a commission, Your Highness. I have a tool kit and a bunk in the aft section that smells like recycled air. What I risk is considerably less than what you risk. That is not true. It is exactly true. No, she shook her head once, a sharp motion. If Valen discovers you aided me, he will not simply discharge you. You are human. You are foreign-born. You have no diplomatic protection aboard a Dominion vessel. He will charge you with interference in sovereign succession, a capital offense under the Fleet Code. Asher was quiet for a moment. I know, he said. Salyara's lips parted. Her eyes searched his face, and what she found there, no hesitation, no calculation, no martyrdom, just a steady certainty, made her go still. Why? She whispered. Asher looked at the viewport. The blue-white of hyperspace churned in silence. Because 300 people on this ship just listened to a man erase your name, and not one of them knocked on your door. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of something neither of them named. Salyara swallowed. Then we begin tonight. Before the third watch, Salyara showed him the messages. She had intercepted them through a back channel, a private relay her mother had installed in the royal suite years ago, one that even Commander Valen did not know existed. Empress Tovana had been a woman who believed in contingencies. Her daughter had inherited the habit. The messages were between the rival and Valen. 17 exchanges over the past 4 months. Asher read them on the suite's display, leaning against the viewport frame with his arms crossed, and with each message, the shape of the conspiracy sharpened. The rival had promised Valen a promotion to fleet admiral. He had promised the other 3 captains in the convoy posts in his new cabinet. He had drafted the fitness clause petition with his own legal counsel and sent it to Valen encrypted, 6 weeks before the Thessara left port. The clause itself was a relic, designed 2 centuries ago to prevent a sovereign with a communicable plague from spreading it through the coronation ceremony. It had never been intended to address physical disability. The rival's counsel had reinterpreted it with the kind of creative legal violence that only ambition could motivate. But the 17th message was the one that made Asher's jaw tighten. It was from the arrival to Valen, sent 12 hours ago, and it read, "If legal delay fails, ensure the ship arrives damaged. A vessel under emergency repair protocol cannot deliver a claimant. The coronation window will close regardless." Asher read it twice. "He is willing to damage the ship," Selyara said quietly, "with 1,200 people aboard. He is willing to do whatever it takes to sit in that chair." Selyara's hands were steady, but her eyes were not. "My cousin and I played together as children, before my sisters died, before my injury. He used to bring me star flowers from the palace gardens." She paused. "People change when they see a throne." "People don't change. They just stop pretending." She looked at him, a long, measuring look, the kind that weighed not just the words but the man behind them. "You are not a courtier, Asher." "No. You say what you see. I fix things. Fixing requires seeing what is actually broken, not what everyone has agreed to pretend is fine." Something shifted in her expression, not a smile, but a loosening. The muscles around her eyes relaxed by a fraction. The armor she wore, invisible and heavier than any plating on the ship, eased enough to show the woman underneath. "Then fix this," she said. They moved at the third watch, when the Thesara's corridors dimmed to half-light and the crew rotation thinned to skeleton shifts. Asher wore his maintenance coveralls and carried his standard tool kit, which was the most effective disguise on the ship. A man in coveralls carrying tools was invisible. He had learned that lesson on a dozen stations and ships before this one. You could walk through any door on any vessel in any fleet if you looked like you had been sent to fix something behind it. Selyara could not walk, but she could move. Her hoverchair was silent, a whisper of repulsor field against deck plating, and she navigated the corridors with the precision of someone who had memorized the layout of every ship she had ever been confined to. She wore a dark cloak over her tunic, hood drawn forward. In the half-light, she was a shadow with amber eyes. They took the service corridor from Deck 6 to Deck 9, the long way around, through sections of the ship that had not seen an officer's boots in months. Asher led. Selyara followed. They did not speak. The only sound was the low thrum of the engines through the deck plates and the barely there hum of her chair. Deck 9 was warm. The heat from the engine core radiated through the bulkheads, and the air carried the faint ozone tang of the transit drive. The engine room itself was sealed behind a security door, but the engineering access corridor ran along its outer wall, and from there, Asher could reach the secondary relay conduit that fed down from Deck 12. He pulled the panel. Inside, the conduit was a tangle of fiber optic runs and power couplings, the ship's nervous system laid bare. He found the secondary relay line and traced it with his fingers, reading the ship the way a surgeon reads a body. "This line runs to the hull antenna," he said. "If I splice in a portable transmitter here, it will broadcast on the emergency frequency. The convocation monitors that frequency at all times. Valen cannot jam it without triggering an automated distress response from every ship in the sector." Selyara watched him work. Her hands were folded in her lap, but her eyes missed nothing. "You understand this ship better than its own officers." "I understand the parts they do not look at." He pulled a compact transmitter from his kit, standard maintenance equipment designed for hull breach distress calls. He had modified it in his bunk 2 hours ago. "Your Highness, I need you to record the invocation. The right of conveyance requires a verbal claim from the claimant, spoken name and lineage, transmitted on a monitored frequency. It has to be your voice." She straightened in her chair. For a moment she was entirely still, composing herself, finding the register that 300 years of statute demanded. Then she spoke, and her voice was different, harder, cleaner. The voice of a woman who had been born to rule, and had spent her entire adult life being told she was not fit for it. "I am Selyara of House Caliph, third born of Empress Tovana, surviving heir to the ivory seat. I invoke the right of conveyance under Article 41 of the Dominion Charter, and compel the commanding officer of the DKS Thesara to deliver me to Caliph Prime at maximum sustainable speed for the purpose of lawful coronation. Any delay or interference constitutes an act of obstruction against the sovereign succession and is punishable under the Fleet Code. This claim is made in the presence of one witness, Corporal Asher Marin, Maintenance Division, foreign-born serviceman. Asher's hands were steady on the transmitter. He spliced the last coupling, powered the unit, and sent the recording. The transmission light blinked green. Then the alarms went off. Not the ship's alarms, Valen's alarms. The security override klaxon, a sharp, rising wail that meant the commander had detected unauthorized use of a ship system and had decided to respond with force. "Move," Asher said. They moved. Back through the engineering corridor, through the service passage, Selyara's hoverchair keeping pace with Asher's quick stride. Behind them, boots hammered on deck plating security detail, responding to the klaxon, converging on Deck 9. They were halfway through Deck 10 when Asher stopped. He held up one hand, and Selyara's hoverchair halted beside him in the dim corridor. Ahead, through a junction window, they could see the starboard engineering bay. Two figures were inside, not engineers, officers. They wore command insignia, and they were working on the structural compensator control panel with the focused urgency of men who did not want to be seen. "That is Lieutenant Commander Essek," Selyara whispered, "Valen's tactical officer." Asher watched Essek pull a module from the compensator panel and replace it with something smaller, darker, a modified unit. Asher had installed enough compensator modules to recognize the difference. This one had been altered, its output limiters stripped. "They are sabotaging the compensators," Asher said, and his voice was very quiet. "The 17th message, the rival's contingency. If the convocation orders maximum speed and the compensators are compromised, the hull will not handle the acceleration. The damage will look like an engineering failure, not sabotage." Selyara's face went pale. Even in the dim light, the lavender gray of her skin visibly lost color. "They are willing to kill everyone on board. They are willing to create a crisis that prevents your arrival. Whether anyone dies is a secondary consideration. That is not a distinction that matters to 1,200 people." "No, it is not." Asher looked at her. The decision was immediate and wordless. They could not stop the sabotage without revealing themselves, and revealing themselves before the transmission was sent would give Valen time to destroy the secondary relay. The transmission came first. Everything else was secondary. But now they knew what was coming after. "When we send the invocation," Asher said, "the convocation will order maximum speed. When the engines accelerate, those compensators will fail. We need the transmission sent and the compensators fixed, and we cannot do both at the same time." "Send the transmission first," Selyara said. Her voice was hard. "Then fix the compensators." "There may not be time." "Then there may not be time. But without the transmission, I never reach Caliph Prime at all, and the rival sits in the ivory seat and my mother's legacy dies. Send it first." He nodded. They moved on. They made it to the junction between decks 8 and 7 before the first patrol found them. 3 Caliph security officers, armored, weapons drawn, blocking the corridor. The lead officer's face shifted when he saw the hoverchair. Confusion, then recognition, then a careful blankness that said he had been given orders and was going to follow them regardless of who was in front of him. "Princess Selyara," the officer said, "Commander Valen has ordered you confined to your suite pending an investigation into unauthorized communications." Selyara did not flinch. "On what authority?" "Emergency security protocol, Your Highness. The commander has invoked." "The commander does not have authority to confine the heir to the ivory seat. Article 12 of the Fleet Code is explicit. I outrank every officer on this vessel. I outrank the commander himself. And as of 3 minutes ago, my invocation of the right of conveyance has been transmitted to the convocation on a monitored emergency frequency. Every ship in this sector has already received it. If Commander Valen wishes to explain to the convocation why he is detaining their Empress Designate, he is welcome to try. The security officer hesitated, his weapon hand lowered by a fraction. He glanced at his companions. Neither moved. Asher stood beside Selyara's hoverchair. He had no weapon. He had a tool kit. His hands were loose at his sides, and his expression was the same one it had been in the observation suite, steady, composed, entirely without drama. He was not a hero. He was a man standing where he had chosen to stand. The officer looked at Asher. The human stays. He is to be arrested for interference in sovereign proceedings. The human, Selyara said, and her voice dropped to a register that Asher had not heard before, low, controlled, and carrying the kind of authority that does not need volume, is my witness. Article 41, Section 3. A witness to a right of conveyance invocation is under the personal protection of the claimant until the claim is adjudicated. If you arrest him, you invalidate the invocation, and the convocation will have questions about why Commander Valen's first act upon receiving a lawful succession claim was to destroy its legal standing. The corridor was silent. The security officer's jaw worked. He looked at his companions again. One of them, younger, a junior lieutenant, had shifted his weight back. Not a retreat, a hesitation. The kind of hesitation that happened when a soldier realized the order he was following might be the one that ended his career. Stand aside, Selyara said. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. They stood aside. Asher walked beside her hoverchair through the gap, and neither of them looked back. They reached the observation suite. Selyara sealed the door, not with the standard lock, but with the sovereign override she had never used before, the one hardwired to the heir's biometric signature. The door would not open again for anyone below the rank of Empress. That will hold for perhaps 4 hours, she said. Valen can petition the Security Council to override the sovereign seal. It will take them time to assemble, and time to argue, but he will do it. 4 hours is enough, Asher said. The convocation will have received the invocation by now. If they acknowledge it, every ship in the convoy is legally compelled to comply. If they will acknowledge it, you are the lawful heir. The statute is clear. Selyara looked at him. Her hoverchair was positioned by the viewport, and the blue white of hyperspace cast her face in shifting light. Her expression was something Asher had not seen on her before, not the composure, not the dry wit, not the controlled anger. Something softer, something that cost her to show. You sound very certain, she said, for a man who just committed a capital offense. I am certain because I listened to you speak that invocation, Your Highness. Every officer on this ship has spent 6 months talking around you, over you, and past you. In 30 seconds, you reminded them that you are the reason they exist. Her breath caught. Not a gasp, something quieter. The sound a person makes when they have been holding something so tightly for so long that the muscles have forgotten how to release, and then a single sentence finds the latch. She looked away, toward the viewport. The blue-white light made her eyes bright. Asher, she said. It was the first time she had used his name. Yes, Your Highness. My name is Selyara. He nodded slowly. Selyara. They sat in the observation suite and waited. The ship hummed around them. The hyperspace light shifted. Neither of them spoke for a while, and the silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had done a hard thing together and did not need to fill the space afterward with noise. 20 minutes in, her communicator chimed with an incoming text channel. She read it, and her lips thinned. The rival, she said. He has sent a formal counterpetition to the convocation. He is arguing that my invocation is invalid because, A foreign-born serviceman cannot legally serve as a witness under the Fleet Code. Can he? He is wrong. Article 41 does not specify species or birth origin for witnesses. But the legal argument will take time to resolve, and time is what he is buying. She set the communicator down. He knows about the sabotaged compensators. He knows what will happen when the convocation orders acceleration. He is trying to delay the convocation's response long enough for the compensators to do their work. Asher leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. How long before the convocation rules on the counterpetition? The Grand Adjudicator is not obligated to hear it. The right of conveyance is a direct sovereign claim. It takes priority over procedural challenges. But the adjudicator may choose to hear it as a courtesy, and courtesy is where the rivals' allies have been winning for years. They are polite men. They file objections in triplicate. They schedule delays with great regret, and every hour of courtesy is another hour the ship drifts. Asher was quiet, then he said, "The compensators. What about them? When the acceleration order comes, and it will come, because the statute is clear, and the Grand Adjudicator did not rise to that position by being indecisive, I need to be on deck 10. If I can reach the compensator panel and pull Essex modified module before the engines hit full output, the structural failure never happens. That is 4 decks away, through 2 security checkpoints. I have my maintenance credentials. The checkpoints scan for rank, not intent." Selyara studied him. The amber of her eyes was steady, searching, and what she was searching for was not competence. She had already seen that, but something else. Something she was not accustomed to finding. "You have been planning for the worst outcome since we left Deck 9, she said. "I have been planning for the worst outcome since I heard Valen erase your name." The faintest tremor passed through her chin. She controlled it. "Then we planned together." An hour passed, then 2. The first sign came as a vibration through the deck, a subtle shift in the engine's frequency. Asher felt it through his boots and stood. "The engines are accelerating." Selyara's hands gripped her armrests. "Toward us or away?" Asher pressed his palm flat against the bulkhead, reading the vibration the way he had read 100 ships. "Toward. The transit drive is increasing output. Someone on this ship just received an order they could not refuse." Her communicator chimed. She looked at it, then at Asher. Then she opened the channel. The voice that came through was not Valen's. It was deeper, older, carrying the formal cadence of a man who had been reading official pronouncements since before Selyara was born. Asher recognized the register even before the title was spoken. The Grand Adjudicator of the Convocation of Houses. "Princess Selyara of House Caliph. The Convocation has received and verified your invocation of the right of conveyance under Article 41. Your claim is lawful. Commander Valen of the DKS Thessara is hereby ordered to deliver you to Caliph Prime at maximum sustainable speed. Any further delay or obstruction will be treated as a criminal act against the sovereign succession. The convocation awaits your arrival." The channel closed. Selyara did not move. She sat in her hover chair, one hand on the communicator, the other flat against the armrest, and she breathed. In, out. The kind of breathing a person does when the wave finally breaks and they realize they are still standing. Asher was already moving. "The compensators. I have to reach Deck 10 before the engines hit full output." "Go." He unsealed the sovereign override and stepped through. The corridor was empty. The security detail had withdrawn after Selyara's invocation of Article 12, and Valen's authority was crumbling in real time. Each officer on the ship recalculating their loyalty as the convocation's order rippled through the chain of command. Asher ran, not the controlled stride he had used in the corridors before, a full sprint, boots hammering on deck plating, tool kit bouncing against his hip. 4 decks, 2 checkpoints. The engines were already shifting beneath him. The the transit drive building power, and he could feel the acceleration in his bones. He cleared the first checkpoint at a dead run. The sentry saw his maintenance credentials and waved him through without a word. The man's face said he had heard the convocation's order and wanted no part of whatever was about to happen. The second checkpoint was unmanned. The officer who should have been there had abandoned his post. The corridor beyond it was dim, the overhead lights flickering as the power grid redistributed for maximum engine output. Asher reached Deck 10. He reached the starboard engineering bay. The door was open. Inside, the compensator panel was exactly as he had seen it through the junction window, except the lights on Essex modified module were red now, blinking in a rapid sequence that meant the unit was already under load. He was too late. The engines had reached maximum output 6 seconds before he arrived. The modified compensator module, with its output limiters stripped, was feeding unchecked power to the structural framework. The hull was absorbing forces it was never designed to handle, and somewhere in the starboard sections, the metal was already beginning to fail. Asher pulled the module anyway, ripped it from the panel with both hands, tossing it to the floor where it sparked and died. He slammed his own backup module, a standard unit from his tool kit, the one he carried for exactly this kind of emergency, into the slot and locked it home. But the damage was done. The 6 seconds of unchecked compensator output had started a chain reaction in the starboard hull. You could not put the stress back into the metal once it had exceeded tolerance. You could only manage what came next. Then the second alert came. Not a klaxon this time. A low, resonant alarm, the one Asher had prayed he would never hear on any ship, the alarm that turned his blood cold. Hull breach warning. The Thesaurus shuddered. The lights flickered, died, came back in emergency red. The viewport showed hyperspace fracturing. The ship was dropping out of transit, and it was not dropping cleanly. The hull screamed as structural members torqued against forces they were not designed to handle. "What is happening?" Salyara's voice was sharp but controlled. Asher was already at the suite's engineering panel, pulling diagnostics. His hands moved with the automatic precision of a man who had spent 14 years learning ships from the inside out. "We have a cascading failure in the starboard hull section. 3 decks. The acceleration order Valen pushed the transit drive beyond safe parameters. The drive core overloaded the structural compensators." Another shudder. The deck tilted. Emergency foam hissed from ceiling vents. "Can the ship hold?" Asher read the diagnostics. His face did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted, a calculation that was also a decision. "The ship can hold if someone closes the manual isolation valves on Deck 14. The automated system failed when the compensators overloaded. Without manual isolation, the breach will propagate through the starboard sections and reach the engine core in," he checked the readout, 22 minutes. "And Deck 14 is on the starboard side, past the breach zone." Salyara understood immediately. "You cannot reach it." "I can reach it. The maintenance access tube from Deck 12 runs along the outer hull. It bypasses the breached sections. I installed the seals on that tube myself. They will hold." Asher, her voice changed. The authority was gone. What was left was raw. The outer hull maintenance tube in an active breach zone with structural compensators failing. "I know what it is. You will die. The ship holds 1,200 people, Salyara, including the Empress Designate." She reached for his arm. Her hand closed around his wrist, and the grip was stronger than he expected, stronger than anyone expected of a woman who could not walk. Her fingers were cool against his skin, and she held on the way a person holds on when they are trying to make the universe pause long enough to hear them. "I did not ask you to die for me," she said. Her eyes were wet, composed, not crying. The eyes of a woman who had learned to carry grief without letting it spill because the world had given her too much practice. Asher looked at her hand on his wrist, then at her face. "You did not ask me to knock on your door either," he said. "And yet—" He gently disengaged her grip. He picked up his tool kit. He walked to the door, entered the override code she had given him an hour ago, and stepped through. The maintenance access tube was exactly as bad as he expected. The outer hull groaned around him, the metal flexing with each shudder of the failing compensators. Emergency lighting flickered in amber strips along the tube ceiling, and through the transparent inspection panels beneath his hands and knees, he could see the void, the real void. Not the blue-white of hyperspace, but the absolute black of normal space, because the ship had dropped out of transit and was now drifting with 3 decks open to vacuum. He crawled. The tube was narrow enough that his shoulders brushed both walls. The air was thin, life support was failing in the outer sections, and what reached the tube was recycled to the edge of uselessness. His breath came in short, controlled bursts. His hands found each handhold by feel, by memory, by the 14 years of ships that had taught him where the metal lived and how it talked. Deck 14 was 10 minutes away. The breach was spreading. He could feel it, a low, continuous vibration that was not the engines, not the hull, but the sound of a ship coming apart at the seams, slowly, section by section, like a body losing its grip. He reached the first isolation valve at the 7-minute mark. It was a manual wheel, corroded, untouched since the Thesara's last refit. He wrapped both hands around it and pulled. It did not move. He braced his boots against the tube wall, set his jaw, and pulled again, and the wheel screamed as it turned metal on metal, a sound that echoed through the tube like a gunshot. The first section sealed. The vibration changed one frequency, dropping out of the chorus. He moved to the second valve. This one was worse. The breach had warped the surrounding bulkhead and the valve housing was partially crushed. Asher pulled his multi-tool from his kit, wedged it behind the housing, and levered. The housing cracked. He got his hands on the wheel and turned it, and something in his left shoulder popped, a tendon, maybe a ligament, the kind of injury that would matter later if there was a later. The second section sealed. 2 more valves. The tube was getting hotter. The breach zone was close enough now that he could feel the radiation from the exposed structural members, not dangerous yet, but getting there. His hands were slick with sweat. His vision was narrowing at the edges, the thin air taking its toll. 3rd valve, this one turned clean, the section sealed. 4th valve, the last one. The one that would cut the engine core off from the propagating breach and save the ship. He reached it and the tube buckled. The impact threw him against the ceiling, then the floor. His tool kit scattered. His forehead hit metal, and for a moment the world was white noise and copper on his tongue. He blinked. The emergency lights were dying amber, fading to a faint, pulsing glow. The tube was deforming around him, the walls pressing inward as the hull section flexed. He found the valve. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from oxygen deprivation and the shoulder that was no longer cooperating. He wrapped his right hand around the wheel. His left hand hung. He pulled with everything he had. The wheel moved. 1 turn, 2, 3. The locking mechanism engaged with a heavy, resonant clank that he felt in his teeth. The 4th section sealed. The vibration stopped. Asher lay on the floor of the maintenance tube, breathing recycled air that tasted like metal and victory, and he felt the ship steady around him. The Thesara was holding. 1,200 lives, held together by 4 manual valves and a maintenance corporal with a dislocated shoulder. He laughed. It hurt, he laughed anyway. Getting back was slower. His left arm was useless, and the tube was partially deformed now, narrower in sections where the hull had flexed. He crawled one-armed, dragging his tool kit behind him, stopping every few meters to breathe and let the darkness at the edges of his vision recede. When he reached the access hatch on deck 12, it was open. 2 Caliph engineers were waiting, young, wide-eyed, their faces pale in the emergency lighting. One of them reached into the tube and pulled him out, and Asher's legs buckled as they hit the deck. He sat against the bulkhead, cradling his left arm, and looked up at two aliens who were staring at him as though they had just watched a dead man walk. "The valves are sealed," he said. "You might want to reinforce the second one. The housing is cracked." They carried him to the medical bay. He did not remember most of the walk. The adrenaline was bleeding out, and the world had taken on the soft, distant quality of a dream being had by someone else. He remembered lights. He remembered voices speaking Caliph too fast for him to follow. He remembered a corridor full of crew members who had stopped working to watch him pass. And the silence that followed him was not the silence of indifference, but the silence of people recalibrating something fundamental about the man they had spent 6 months pretending did not exist. He remembered one face in particular, the junior lieutenant from the security patrol, the one who had hesitated. The lieutenant was standing at the edge of the corridor, still in his armor, his pike at his side. When Asher passed, the lieutenant brought his fist to his chest in the Caliph salute, the formal gesture of acknowledgement between equals. His commanding officer was standing 3 meters away. The commanding officer saw it. The commanding officer said nothing. He remembered the medic's hands, careful and precise, resetting his shoulder with a device that hummed like a tuning fork. When he woke, the observation suite's viewport showed stars, not hyperspace, real stars, and beyond them, growing larger with each passing moment, a planet vast, silver-green, banded with cloud formations that caught the light of a distant sun. Caliph Prime. The hover chair was beside his bed. Selyara was in it. She was wearing a different tunic, white, formal, embroidered at the collar with the silver sigil of House Caliph. Her dark teal hair was combed back. Her expression was the one he had seen in the observation suite, the one that cost her to show, except now she was not trying to hide it. Her eyes were wet, composed, the amber of them catching the planet's light. "The convocation has confirmed my coronation," she said. "We arrive in 4 hours. Commander Valen has been relieved of command and placed under arrest. Chancellor Drevin has petitioned to serve as my interim advisor." A pause. "He is, I think, embarrassed." Asher's shoulder throbbed. His mouth was dry. He looked at her. "Good," he said. Selyara's lips pressed together. She looked down at her hands, then back at him. "The convocation has asked me to name my first official act as Empress," she said. "They expect a policy declaration, a trade agreement, a military appointment." Her voice was steady, but beneath it, something trembled, not weakness, but the vibration of a decision that had already been made. "I intend to name a royal advocate, a position that has not existed in the Dominion for 2 centuries. A personal counsel to the Empress, accountable to no one but the sovereign, with authority to speak on behalf of the throne in any chamber, on any vessel, before any court." Asher stared at her. "The position requires no specific rank," she continued. "No military commission, no noble birth, no species restriction. It requires only—" Her voice caught, and she paused, and when she spoke again, it was with the terrible gentleness of someone saying the most important thing they have ever said and knowing that it will change everything. "It requires only that the Empress trust the advocate with her life." The medical bay was quiet. The hum of the ship, the distant murmur of the approaching planet, the sound of 2 hearts beating in a room that the universe had conspired to make very small. "Selyara," Asher said. "You knocked on my door," she said. Her voice broke on the last word, not apart but open, like a hull seal releasing after too much pressure, and what came through was not damage but relief. "When 1,200 people listened to a man erase my name, you knocked on my door. You stood in a corridor with 3 armed officers and did not move. You crawled through a dying ship with 1 arm to close 4 valves because I was on the other side. You are the only person in this Dominion who looked at me and did not see the chair." She reached across the gap between the hover chair and the medical bed. Her hand found his, the good one, the right one, the one that had turned 4 valves and held a tool kit and knocked on a door. Her fingers closed around his, and she held on. "I am naming you," she said, "if you will stay." Asher looked at her hand on his, the lavender gray of her skin against the weathered tan of his, the silver sigil on her collar, catching light. Her eyes amber, bronze, wet, steady, holding his with the ferocity of a woman who had spent her life being told she could not hold anything at all. He closed his hand around hers. "I stayed the moment I knocked," he said. Selyara's breath shuddered. She did not look away, neither did he. The Thessara's engines deepened as the ship settled into orbital approach. Through the viewport, Caliph Prime grew until it filled the glass silver-green continents, cloud-bright oceans, the scattered lights of cities waking to receive their empress. The ship that had tried to erase her name was now carrying her home, and the man who had no rank, no commission, no species standing, no reason to knock on her door except the one reason that mattered was beside her. 2 hours before landing, Chancellor Drevin arrived at the medical bay. He stood in the doorway with his hands clasped behind his back, his heavy jowls drawn, his eyes carrying the particular exhaustion of a man who had spent decades managing the possible and had just watched the impossible happen without him. "Your Highness," he said. Then, after a pause that contained an entire career's worth of recalibration, "Your Majesty." Selyara studied him. "Chancellor. I have been in contact with the Convocation Security Council. Commander Valen has provided a full confession. He has named your cousin the rival as the architect of the delay, and the Drevin's voice tightened. The compensator sabotage. The rival's personal guard has been disarmed. He himself has been placed under house arrest in the capital pending formal charges." "What charges?" "Conspiracy against the sovereign succession, sabotage of a Dominion vessel, attempted obstruction of a right of conveyance." Drevin paused. "Attempted murder if the prosecution can demonstrate that the compensator modification was designed to cause structural failure with a claimant aboard." Selyara was quiet for a long moment. Asher watched her face. The anger was there, he could see it in the set of her jaw, the tightness around her eyes, but it was not the anger of vengeance. It was the anger of a woman who had lost her childhood to a fall, lost her sisters to a frontier collapse, lost her mother to illness, and now discovered that her last surviving family member had been willing to let her die in the void between stars rather than see her sit in a chair he wanted for himself. "I will deal with the rival after the coronation," she said, "not before." Drevin nodded. He turned to leave, then stopped. He looked at Asher, really looked, for the first time, without the reflexive dismissal of rank and species that had characterized every interaction they had shared over 6 months. "Corporal Marin," he said. "Chancellor, the engineering team has confirmed that the compensator module you installed, the replacement from your maintenance kit, is the unit that prevented the cascade from reaching the engine core. Without it, the transit drive would have breached, and the Thessara would have been lost with all hands." Drevin's voice was carefully controlled, but something cracked beneath it. "You were carrying a backup compensator module in your personal toolkit." "Yes. That is not standard maintenance equipment for a hull repair corporal." Asher looked at his toolkit sitting on the floor beside the medical bed. Scuffed, dented, held together by replacement latches and a strip of adhesive tape he had applied 3 months ago. Every tool in it was there because he had learned, on a dozen ships before this one, that the difference between a crisis and a catastrophe was usually one small thing that someone had thought to bring. "I carry what the ship might need," he said. "The ship needed it." Drevin stared at him for a 3 count. Then the Chancellor's chin dipped, not a formal bow, not a gesture of rank, but the involuntary movement of a man acknowledging something he could not put into protocol. "He left." Selyara looked at Asher. "You carry backup compensator modules." "I carry a lot of things." You carry backup compensator modules for a ship class you were never trained to service, in a tool kit you bought with your own pay, because you thought someone might need them. Yes. She shook her head. Not in disbelief, in something closer to wonder. The quiet, aching wonder of a person discovering that the universe still contained things she had not accounted for. Asher Marin, she said softly, where did you come from? A repair dock on Ganymede Station. Before that, a freighter out of Titan. Before that, a mining rig in the Callisto Belt. He shrugged with his good shoulder. I came from everywhere that no one looks twice at the man with the wrench. Her eyes held his. The amber was warm. Not the controlled warmth of diplomatic courtesy, but the real warmth of a woman looking at a man and seeing him clearly, perhaps for the first time. Perhaps for the first time anyone had ever looked at him that way. I looked twice, she said. The landing was smooth. The Thesara settled onto the ceremonial platform outside the capital with the precision of a ship that had very nearly died and was now determined to arrive properly. Through the viewport, Asher could see the welcoming procession, a column of Caliph honor guards in silver armor, their formations perfect, their pikes catching the morning sun. Beyond them, the coronation processional road stretched toward the distant spires of the Palace of Houses, white stone gleaming against the silver-green sky. Selyara straightened in her hover chair. She smoothed the front of her white tunic. She looked at Asher. Walk with me, she said. It was not a command. It was a question dressed in the grammar of certainty, because she had learned that questions invited refusal, and she could not afford another refusal today. Yes, he said. The coronation chamber was a cathedral of light. Pillars of white stone rose to a vaulted ceiling, and morning sun poured through crystal panels that scattered it into 1,000 refracting beams. The convocation of houses filled the chamber, 400 delegates from every province, every fleet, every colony of the Dominion, seated in ascending tiers around a central dais where the ivory seat waited, ancient and unadorned. Selyara arrived in her hover chair. The chamber went quiet, not the controlled silence of protocol. The deep, uncertain silence of a room that had expected someone else, and was now forced to confront the person who was actually supposed to be there. She wore white, the formal coronation robe of House Caliph, high-collared, long-sleeved, embroidered with the silver sigil repeated in a pattern that cascaded from collar to hem. Her dark teal hair was pulled back from her pointed ears. No crown, the crown would be placed during the ceremony. She wore no jewelry. She carried nothing. She needed nothing. Asher walked beside her. He wore his maintenance coveralls. He had refused the formal garments Chancellor Dreven had offered, not out of stubbornness, but out of honesty. He was what he was, and what he was had been enough to save the ship. He carried his tool kit over his good shoulder, the left one still wrapped in a stabilizing brace. His face was bruised from the tube. His hands were scraped raw. The delegates stared. Asher did not stare back. He walked with the same steady, unhurried gait he had used in every corridor of every ship he had ever served, on the gait of a man who belonged where he was because he had chosen to be there. And no title or rank or species designation could add to or subtract from that. Selyara reached the dais. The hoverchair hummed as it positioned itself before the ivory seat. The grand adjudicator stepped forward, the same voice that had confirmed her invocation over the comm channel, now embodied in a tall, ancient Caliph woman with white hair and eyes like polished obsidian. Before the adjudicator could speak, a voice rose from the third tier. I invoke the right of challenge. The chamber shifted. Every head turned. The voice belonged to a young Caliph man in a formal gray suit, not the rival himself, who was under arrest, but his legal proxy, a sharp-featured counselor named Devane who had been retained to represent the family interest even in the rival's absence. Devane stood with his hands folded, his expression carefully neutral, his voice pitched to carry. Under Section 9 of the Succession Charter, Devane continued, Any member of a claimant house may challenge the fitness of a successor prior to the coronation oath. The challenge need not be adjudicated before the ceremony, it need only be spoken. I speak it now. The chamber murmured. Delegates leaned toward each other. The grand adjudicator's expression did not change, but her eyes sharpened. Celyara's hoverchair had stopped at the base of the dais. She did not turn to face Devane. She looked straight ahead, at the ivory seat, at the grand adjudicator, at the crystal ceiling pouring light like a benediction. "The challenge is noted," the grand adjudicator said. Her voice was level, ancient, carrying the weight of a woman who had presided over 11 coronations and heard the right of challenge invoked exactly twice. "The law is clear. A fitness challenge does not prevent the coronation. It initiates a review period of 90 days following the coronation, during which the convocation may examine the challenge and rule. If the convocation finds the challenge without merit, it is dismissed. If the convocation finds the challenge with merit, the sovereign may be required to demonstrate fitness through a trial of the convocation's choosing." Devane inclined his head. "I understand. I merely wish the record to reflect that the challenge was spoken." "The record reflects it." The grand adjudicator turned back to Celyara. "The challenge changes nothing. The coronation proceeds." Asher watched Devane sit. The counselor's face was smooth, his posture relaxed, his hands still folded. But his eyes flicked to Asher for one instant, a single measuring glance, and in that glance was a calculation. 90 days. 90 days to build a case that the Empress was unfit. 90 days to find leverage. 90 days to try again. Asher held the glance until Devane looked away. "Celyara of House Caliph," the grand adjudicator said, "do you claim the ivory seat?" "I do." "Do you pledge to serve the Dominion, its peoples, its worlds, and its laws?" "I do." "Do you name a first act to declare before the convocation?" The chamber leaned forward. 400 delegates, cameras broadcasting to every world in the Dominion, the moment that would define the beginning of her reign. Celyara looked at Asher. He stood at the foot of the dais, tool kit on his shoulder, bruised and scraped and entirely unimpressed by the splendor around him. His eyes were steady. His expression said the same thing it had said in the observation suite, in the corridor with 3 armed officers, in the maintenance tube with the hull screaming around him. "I am here. I am not leaving." Celyara turned back to the grand adjudicator. "I name Asher Marin as royal advocate to the Empress," she said. "A human, a maintenance corporal, the man who heard my name erased and chose to knock on my door." The chamber erupted, not in anger, in shock, the controlled, shattering shock of an institution confronting something it had no precedent for. Delegates rose from their seats. Voices overlapped. The grand adjudicator raised one hand for silence and did not receive it. Asher did not move. Celyara did not look away from the convocation. Her chin was raised. Her eyes were dry. Her hands were steady on the armrests of her hoverchair, and her voice, when she spoke again, carried over the chamber without amplification, without anger, without apology. "The Dominion taught me that a woman who cannot walk cannot rule," she said. "A human who fixes doors taught me that a woman who cannot walk can still stand." She paused. "I intend to stand." The silence that followed was absolute. The grand adjudicator placed the crown, a thin circlet of white metal, unadorned, ancient beyond reckoning, on Celyara's head. In the front row of the convocation, Chancellor Drevin pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. In the second row, the junior lieutenant who had hesitated in the corridor sat with his hands clasped, his jaw tight, his eyes bright. In the fifth row, a delegate Asher did not recognize leaned toward her neighbor and whispered something, and the neighbor nodded slowly and did not look away from the dais. The crown settled. Empress Celyara of House Caliph sat in the ivory seat, and the light from the crystal ceiling caught the circlet on her brow, and for a moment the chamber was nothing but light and silence, and the weight of something old being remade into something new. Asher set his tool kit down on the floor of the dais. He straightened. He looked at her, the empress now, not the princess, not the woman in the hoverchair, but the sovereign of a dominion that had tried to forget her, and she looked back at him. Her eyes were wet, composed, amber and bronze catching light. He inclined his head. Not a bow, he was human, and humans did not bow. An inclination, an acknowledgement, one steady gaze meeting another across a gap that had never been about rank or species or the ability to walk. She inclined hers back. The convocation watched, 400 witnesses, and in that chamber, with the light falling like rain and the weight of the crown settling on a woman the fleet had tried to erase, the only sound was the hum of the ivory seat, ancient and unbroken, welcoming its empress home.